Okay, welcome back, everyone. I hope you watched a lot of interesting posters. We're back for a couple of talks for the end of this first session. And the first speaker is Frigg Speelman from the University of Groningen in the Netherlands, and with a talk entitled The Association Between Local and Population Adult Sex Ratio and Dispersal Behavior in a Cooperative Breeder. And this talk is pre-recorded, and Frigg will be with us at the end of the talk to answer questions.
My name is Frigg Speelman, and I'm a first-year PhD student at the University of Groningen. And welcome to my talk on the association between local and population adult sex ratio and dispersal behavior in a cooperative breeder. So for this particular project, I was interested in the evolution of cooperative breeding. And as you all know, many social animals live and reproduce in stable groups. And one form of group living is cooperative breeding. This is a form of breeding system where, in addition to a core breeding pair, one or more usually non-breeding individuals provide offspring care. And this is widespread across taxa, most notably occurring in fish, mammals, and birds. But although cooperative breeding is widespread, it is not fully understood how this breeding system evolved. It is easy to imagine the fitness benefits of a dominant breeder. For example, they will have increased offspring recruitment and reproductive success due to extra provisioning by helpers, and also because these helpers provision and help with parental care, the dominant breeders will have increased survival due to load lightening. However, it is more difficult to argue what fitness benefits subordinates can gain. As evolutionary theory predicts individuals to maximize their own fitness and thereby reproduction, a central question in the study of group living, sociality, and cooperative breeding is why such philopatric individuals delay dispersal to breed independently. So the question of the evolution of cooperative breeding leads to a second question. Why do sexually mature individuals delay dispersal to an independent breeding position? One potential major driver of delayed dispersal is adult sex ratio, since this can affect the intensity of the costs and benefits related to dispersal. So a meta-analysis already found an association with cooperative breeding. So ASR is more biased in cooperatively breeding species compared to non-cooperatively breeding species in birds. But why is this the case? A bias in ASR can have major implications on the costs and benefits of dispersal. This can be through intersexual aggression, a shortage of breeding territories, a shortage of potential breeding partners, and overall low likelihood of reproduction. For instance, you can imagine that if there are more males in the population than females, males will have more difficulty finding and competing for breeding vacancies and may therefore benefit more by staying in a territory. To explore this, I used the Seychelles warbler as a study species. This is a small passerine endemic to the Seychelles archipelago. And most notably, this species is a facultative cooperative breeder, meaning that we can study individual choices in whether they will or will not breed independently or become a subordinate. And the population that I study is contained on Cruzan Island. And in this contained population, we have over 96% of all birds coloring to monitored. This means we have access to data on the entire population because there's no migration away from this island, enabling accurate measures of adult sex ratio and population densities. All this fieldwork that we did resulted in an extensive data set spanning over 20 years. This includes data on territory borders and quality, and Cruzan Island has a carrying capacity of around 320 birds in around 110 territories. So previous research has already demonstrated that there's a slight female bias in subordinates, and that once individuals disperse, it is often to a dominant breeding position. ASR varies annually, but this is overall female biased, and both male and females can help when they are a subordinate. Yearling warblers have a couple of options once they reach adulthood. They can either stay as a subordinate in their natal territory or disperse to a dominant breeding position. Female warblers, however, are also found to disperse to a non-natal subordinate position. So this is an extra option for these females, which indicates that they may be able to escape some of the costs of dispersing in female bias conditions by becoming a non-natal subordinate. Additionally, females occasionally co-breed as a subordinate. This means they can also gain substantial fitness benefits by staying and being a subordinate. However, males, on the other hand, do not have the option of becoming a non-natal subordinate and never gain parentage as a subordinate. This means that there's a stronger urgency to disperse, which is more dependent on partner availability. Males may have more trouble to find breeding partners with male bias in the ASR. In this situation, it may be better to stay and inherit the breeding position or be on the lookout for nearby vacancies from neighboring territories. And when dispersing, males that do not find a breeding position have to become a floater without a territory, but these floaters face very high mortality rates. So what we wanted to understand in this study is how exactly ASR influences the dispersal in the Seychelles warbler and whether there is a sex difference. So my research question includes the first one: how does ASR relate to dispersal of male yearlings? I expect that ASR is negatively related to dispersal of males. For example, a male bias in ASR will correlate with a decreased likelihood of dispersal, since dispersal is too costly due to limited partner availability. And the second one is the same question, but then for females, and I expect that ASR does not affect dispersal in females, since females can escape increased costs of dispersal when partner availability is low. So I only look at yearlings in this study because I do not want to have confounding effects of previous years. So we use an individual-based model approach using generalized linear mixed models and model averaging. So for each young individual, we tracked whether or not they dispersed. And we correlated this with demographic data using ASR and the density of the entire population, as well as local data on the group level, being the natal territory of the focal individual and their neighbors. And we looked at the composition of the natal territory of the focal individual. We also do a census on Kuzan Island twice a year, in which we monitor and catch individuals and assess territory qualities through measuring the territory size, insect abundance, and vegetation composition. So onto the results. First of all, we found the sex of a yearling does not predict whether they disperse or not. So as you can see, the proportion of dispersed yearlings over the entire data set did not differ significantly between males and females. However, when we look at male yearlings specifically, there is an interaction effect of ASR and density on the population level. So this graph displays the likelihood of individual males dispersing on the y-axis, plotted over the population adult sex ratio on the x-axis. And different lines depict different population sizes. Also, I'd like to point out that all the dots you see on the graph are individuals. So when the population size is relatively large, as indicated by the orange and blue slope, males are less likely to disperse when the population is male biased. However, when the population size is low, which is indicated by the gray line, this effect disappears and is even reversed, although it is a small effect. So we found no effect of ASR or density on the local group level, or an effect of natal territory composition or body condition and territory quality. In females, however, we find no effect of any variable on population level, local group level, or the territory level. Again, this graph displays the likelihood of dispersal on the y-axis plotted over the population adult sex ratio over the x-axis, but then for females. So here you can clearly see no significant effect of adult sex ratio on dispersal. So overall, we can conclude that adult sex ratio is negatively related to dispersal in males. For example, a female bias in ASR will correlate with an increased likelihood of dispersal. However, this effect is only prevalent when the population density is relatively high. Additionally, this effect only exists on the population level and not on the local groups or territory level. And for females, we can confirm that adult sex ratio does not affect dispersal on any level. So, in the Seychelles warbler, the competition for a breeding vacancy among males will likely increase drastically when there are more males in the population. In that case, it is better to stay as a subordinate in order to still gain some benefits by staying in a territory, for example, getting breeding experience, queuing for a breeding position, and budding of territories. However, we cannot say for sure whether yearling warblers decide to disperse themselves or are rather kicked out of their territory by the dominant breeders, since we were unable to monitor this behavior closely in a wild population. But the effect of the population adult sex ratio and density suggests that warblers have access to information of the whole population. And this is quite striking, since warblers are usually observed close to their home territory. However, there is some evidence that warblers may survey the entire population, which is again around 300 individuals. They may be trying to be inconspicuous to other warblers when they're venturing out in order to avoid antagonistic interactions with territorial warblers. But this also makes them harder to spot by observers. Thus, I expect that there will be an observation bias. And finally, and most importantly, our study suggests there is a sex difference in the evolutionary drivers to cooperative breeding. I'd like to thank the following contributors to the study and my supervisors, as well as the entire Warbler team and all the volunteers associated with this project for contributing to the long-term data set. And thank you so much for listening. Don't hesitate to contact me by email or Twitter.
Questions in the chat as they come. Maybe I can start to ask a first question myself. I was wondering, so you've got this very nice field to analyze a lot of data. Can you manipulate, like do some experiments, like manipulate, I don't know, like maybe on a more local scale, what would be the local environment of these birds to see how they would respond to like local information?
So that would be ideal to study this research question in more detail, and also other research question on the warblers. But the problem is that this is a endangered species, and it is on a nature reserve, so it's very difficult to get permits to do experiments. Now, there have been some translocations of some individuals off the island to other islands. So then you kind of can treat this data, because there is an experimental removal of individuals, you could say, as an experiment. So that's something that I'm looking at right now, whether I can use that.
Okay, thanks. I'm still waiting for other questions in the chat, so I will following up with our discussion. So the results you find about the dispersal, so because you mentioned that it was difficult to manipulate this species because it's endangered, so do you find similar results in other species, maybe, in which it would be possible to do manipulations, or?
So there's not really that much out there on the effect of adult-sex ratio on dispersal. There's one other paper on a different bird. I think it was the brown-headed nuthatch, which they actually did experimental treatments of adult-sex ratio, but they really looked at local groups. So it's very difficult to experimentally change the entire population. But this is still a very novel study area, so I'm not really sure if there's much other research out there, but this would it would be nice to look at this, for example, in insects, because they're much easier to manipulate, I think, especially in the lab. You don't really want to do that with birds, I think. So yeah, it's still a very novel area of research.
Yeah, and I assume it's not easy to have such a complete data set, 20 years worth of data.
Yeah, that's actually so there's this limitation that it's not an experimental study, but then because we have so much data, we do have a lot of variation in adult-sex ratio over the years, and it's a very large sample size, which is quite unique for a wild study system.
Yeah. So the results you've shown us were data analysis, right, of this data set? Or? Sorry? The results you've shown us were the results from the analysis of this data set, am I right?
Yeah.
Do you think maybe also some theoretical models would maybe be of help to answer questions where it's difficult to manipulate birds?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So if anyone wants to study that, I highly encourage them to do so. It would be interesting for myself as well, but this study was for my master's, and now I've started a PhD in a slightly different topic, so I don't really think I will have time to build a model.
Yeah.
But it would be really nice if someone could look into that. Yeah.
Yeah, to see if the results you see can be predicted somehow, and yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also interesting that you've got so much data that.
Yes, it would be really nice to look at this from a theoretical perspective, because it's not an experimental study. Again, you never really know for sure whether there is a direct cause,
yes,
or maybe it's another underlying factor, or maybe it's even a consequence.
Yeah.
And also one limitation of this study is that we don't really know whether dispersal behavior is a choice of the individual, or whether they are maybe kicked out by their parents from a territory.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thanks very much. I think it was very nice talk, nice, interesting data also you've shown, nice theory. We still have a couple of minutes, I think, if the chat awakes. Yeah, no, I think so. People watching this video, I think